Ladies and gentlemen, a special message. I am Timothy, founding member of the God Culture and Solomon's Gold series. We as a group thought it was time for me to introduce myself, as we are now bringing conferences to the Philippines. And I will be there and look forward to meeting you. For the past 2 years, the God Culture YouTube channel has received amazing support from so many, and we thank you. We just recently surpassed 4 million views in less than 2 years, and that far exceeds our expectations. Thank you all. Even via email, we have had several offers to give money to support this ministry, and until now, we have not needed. And still, for the function of our YouTube channel, we are pleased to say that we still do not need. However, we realize the importance of expanding, especially Solomon's Gold series, beyond YouTube in the Philippines, as we truly want to reach everyone we possibly can get to, with the restoration of the history of Ophir, Sheba, Tarshish, Havilah, the Garden of Eden, and the land of creation. In fact, after 2 years, no one has proven any of these findings wrong, and that is because they are truth. We are pleased to announce Rise Philippines conferences beginning May 2019 this year. We have partnered with Filipino pastor Paul Madrano, who is a pastor and Bible school director and teacher overseas. We already have more than 12 locations tentatively booked for these conferences in Luzon, May 1st through 12th, Cebu, May 14 through 17, and Mindanao, May 18 through 20. To start, just in the month of May alone, and our intention is to continue from there. We will announce firm dates and venues as soon as possible. In efforts to bring these conferences free to the public in the Philippines, we now need your help to assist in underwriting the cost of these events, and not for the channel. Therefore, we have set up a Patreon account by which you can give monthly to this effort if you are led. And 100% of these monies will go toward conferences in the Philippines. This in no way affects the channel, and we will continue with those videos free of charge. So here's your opportunity to join the God Culture and give not just for these conferences, but also toward future conferences, and you can reach us at thegodculture@gmail.com if you wish to host a conference in your area as well. Patreon allows us to set up monthly giving levels starting at as low as $5 US per month. We are unable to set up multiple currencies or receive cash, though you can also give at the conferences. Just click the link in the description box below this video, or fast forward to the end screen of this video, and there is a give button there which hyperlinks to our Patreon page. For all who give, we will post the donors at each conference. Again, you do not have to do this in order to continue receiving our videos free of charge. But if you wish to support the effort to bring Rise Philippines conferences to the Philippines, we would appreciate the help. Yahuwah bless you and your families, and thank you again for being a part of this effort. Is the Philippines changing its name? It's been all over the news over the past week. We wish to be clear. It is really up to the Filipino people, and we really do not have a vote in the matter, but are more interested in the origin of this name and whether or not this may have prophetic significance, perhaps. When was the last time you heard a significant country changing its name? Well, it's extremely rare, and many times constitutes a change in government and the mindset of a nation. As we have covered the history of the Philippines in very great detail, proving its history goes much further back than the Spanish, nor even the so-called Muslim era in which the Philippines never had such. Or more than 5% of the nation would be Muslim today. And principally, those are all on the southern tip of the country even, so not even spread out geographically. We know it's being pushed today, but they are also telling Africans to return to their Muslim heritage, except that heritage was called slavery, and it was never theirs. They were never Muslims. If the Philippines was ever Muslim, it would be evident. And when Magellan came, his historian Pigafetta clearly identified Filipinos of that time as most definitely not Moors, in his words, or Muslims. Or they would have dealt with the people differently. That's what he said. And to ignore that, to arrive at a Muslim heritage for a country that has never been Muslim, is, in any sense, really not supported, and it really escapes us as to how one can connect such illogical views. Also, we keep seeing these unproven speculations that Filipinos came from Malaysia, and yet we have already proven on this channel it's the other way around. The Polynesian island populations originate in the Philippines, not the other way around. And that is proven scientifically by chicken migration patterns, and most especially much older bones found in the Philippines than in Malaysia. If they are going to use bones to date the origin of man, which we actually find to be a laughable way to do so, as anyone could find older bones tomorrow perhaps, and everything shifts yet again, so really not a definite science. Not to mention, they can't actually date anything accurately anyway prior to the flood. The number one way to prove out the origin of life is much simpler and far more specific, as cultures all over the world record a worldwide, not local, flood which wiped out almost all land animals and humans, yet it did not have the same effect on marine life. So, find the most diverse marine population on Earth, and you have found the origin of life. And that just so happens to be the Sulu-Sulawesi seascape in the Sulu Sea of the Philippines. We cover that in very great detail. And not the Great Barrier Reef, even. And marine biologists have termed this small area as the center of marine biodiversity on Earth. All of it. They won't then conclude what we will, because they disconnect other disciplines such as history foolishly, and we do not. So this week, it's been all over the news. President Duterte wants to rename the Philippines Maharlika. Now, legislation was already introduced, and he's supporting it and bringing it back to the surface a couple of years later, which makes sense. But does this make sense? What is the meaning and origin of the word Maharlika? Well, once again, we will show you scholars can't really agree. And the reason? Well, they don't know the full history of the Philippines, which would have to include Ophir, Sheba, Tarshish, the Garden of Eden, and the land of creation. Yeah, we prove that overwhelmingly in this series, and if you haven't watched, and it's been about 2 years since releasing this video, not one person has been able to disprove our findings. So go watch that, because it is truth. Now let's dig in deep here. From GMA News, Duterte wants Philippines renamed Maharlika. President Rodrigo Duterte on Monday expressed his agreement with the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos's supposed plan to change the country's name from the Philippines to Maharlika. Notice these reporters always have a bent when they write. There's no such thing as unbiased reporting. supposed plan, as if it isn't actually on record. It is, and they say so in the articles, but they still say supposed plan. Really nonsense, and you have to look through that when you're reading these articles, and we'll expose that throughout. The Philippines was named after the Spanish monarch Philip II. The archipelago was a Spanish colony for centuries until it became a U.S. protectorate in 1898. Well, I guess GMA forgot the part that the U.S. brought in its military to crush the Philippines, in which somewhere around 200,000 Filipinos were killed as they were forced to be a part of this protectorate? Talk about fake news. The news is fake news more often than not, spinning its false narratives constantly in subtle references just exactly like this. Philippines, because it was discovered by Magellan. Oh, we love it when we see that one. Funny how they always say this, but were there not already people in the Philippines when Magellan came? Of course there were. So it was already discovered, and Magellan was nowhere near the first, nor significant from that standpoint. He didn't discover anything, as its trading history goes all the way back to the days of King Solomon in Israel, 1000 BC, and yes, we prove that. If you have not watched this series, go back and watch, and you will find we do not speculate those things. We prove them out from multiple directions, and again, no one has disproven it. So, Magellan discovered nothing. What he did was attempt to conquer a land that in his own historian's, Pigafetta's writings, already knew how to read and write, had a religion far more similar to the Bible than Catholicism, unfortunately. Even worshiping a god called Abba, which matches the title Yahusha, Jesus, used in the Garden of Gethsemane for God, my Father. And it is outright fraud for the Jesuits to have left Abba, the first recorded god in the Philippines, completely off the Philippines' deities list, which they have. It had an organizational structure of innumerable barangays. It had at least 8 ships as large as Magellan's, as well as several 80-foot barangay ships, which have now been unearthed in Butuan. So, thus, proven fact. They had an amazing abundance of wealth, which is illustrated in the Boxer Codex of 1595, which you see in the background. And this is confirmed by archaeology in recent days in the finding of the Surigao treasure from Cagayan province, which matched exactly these very rare gold pieces, especially the sacred thread itself. These are on display at the Ayala Museum in Makati. And you can even find their videos online, or just go back and watch part 6 of Solomon's Gold series, and we cover this. So, was this land discovered by Magellan? No. Targeted for conquest, but not discovered. Using the money of King Philip. Back to the article. Duterte goes on in his Tagalog to cite Marcos's plan to rename the Philippines as Maharlika, which is pretty well confirmed in history. We'll show you. The Republic of Maharlika, because Maharlika is a Malay word. Well, is it? Actually, no, it's not. But we'll show you. They are just repeating a Jesuit line, really. It's what we've all been taught. We're not saying Duterte is wrong. And it means more of a concept of serenity and peace. Duterte added, well, he's right. That's what we've been taught. But if President Duterte would watch Solomon's Gold series, we believe he would find himself in agreement with our findings, largely. In 1978, former Senator Eddie Ilarde filed Parliamentary Bill 195, seeking to change the name Philippines to Maharlika. It's funny because they say earlier in the article, remember, that Marcos supposedly wanted the name changed, and then they admit a bill was actually filed in his era. So why do they say things like that? Well, because this is all Jesuit news, as there really is no other news out there. The proposal was criticized. Well, by whom? Well, likely by GMA, perhaps. But they use such language in news reports all the time as if it is everyone criticized, because it's what it looks like and that is how it's intended. But everything is criticized, so all such language does is attempt to place a blemish on the narrative. Because look at what comes up next. Due to its association with Marcos. Dun, 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 dun. So that's when the music plays in the background as the supposedly, well, what does GMA think of Marcos? You see that throughout their articles. It's very obvious they don't like the guy. Who had claimed to have formed a guerrilla unit of the same name during the Japanese occupation in the 1940s. Of course, later in the article, and we're not going to cover this, they claim that the U.S. military says that's not true. Well, okay, but are they telling the truth? Good question. Anyway, in June 2017, Migdalo Representative Gary Alejano filed a bill which seeks the creation of a commission that would look into the name of the Philippines under House Bill 5867. Alejano proposed the creation of Geographic Renaming Commission, which would study the possibility and the feasibility of renaming our country. Very good. The lawmaker said possible name should appropriately address and define us as a people and nation. Indeed, it should, and very good. We think this would be awesome for the land of Ophir to restore its identity, whether the name is Maharlika or maybe even Ophir, Havila, or any of its ancient names as far as we're concerned. Again, we're not voting. It needs a full restoration of history, though, with it. And this series is only the beginning of such restoration. This is a fascinating development, though, and possibly prophetic indeed. Now, many from other countries watching this may not be aware of the name Maharlika, and we will show you even historians do not agree with the definition of the word in this article or any. They're all over the map on a few different definitions. However, we are going to prove its root, and it's far more telling and valuable, and this word far more precious as a connotation for the country. We feel it more important that Filipinos learn their true identity, and we agree with that initiative. Alejano said that renaming the country would rid it of the vestiges of colonialism. Well said, and it is time, definitely. Establish the national identity and define how the nation, people, and national language would be addressed internationally. Good. He also said that many countries that were former colonies had reverted back to their former pre-colonized names, as it gives them a sense of national pride and identity as a free people. Indeed, it does. The bill is still pending before the committee level. This is potentially really big news, not because yet another country that was colonized may be changing its name back to pre-colonial times, but more so because the history of this land is far richer than any land on earth. And this is tied to prophecy, and we'll get there. First, what is this word Maharlika? Where did it come from? Straight out of Wikipedia, and yes, this is sourced, and using Wikipedia in such cases is as accurate as anything else, but far easier to find for all of us. It doesn't make it right, but it does represent the standard understanding in most cases when sourced appropriately. The Maharlika were the feudal warrior class in ancient Tagalog society in Luzon, the Philippines, translated in Spanish as hidalgos, and meaning free men, libres, or freedmen. Note, they do not offer this connection here, however. They belong to the lower nobility class, similar to the Timawa of the Visayan people. They now make an association, and it is an assumption. They don't prove that either. And we'll show you another reference that disagrees with that statement. In modern Filipino, however, the term has come to mean royal nobility. And this is the standard view. Most people think that Maharlika means royal nobility, which was actually restricted to the hereditary Maganu class. However, we will show you historians who disagree with that, and we will prove that is not the case. In various Indo-Malayan languages, as well as the languages of the Muslim areas of the Philippines, key point, the cognates Mardika, now is that Maharlika? No. Merdika, now is that Maharlika? No. Merdeheka, now is that Maharlika? No. Or Maradika, now is that Maharlika? No. Mean freedom, as opposed to servitude. So you give us 4 words, which are not Maharlika, in order to define Maharlika. Again, not Wikipedia's fault. This is the standard Jesuit line, which will prove for much of academia who do not know the history of the Philippines in its entirety. The Merdikas, also spelled Mardikas or Mardikas, okay. Keep stretching. You still aren't reaching Maharlika, are you? No. Whose name comes from the same edonym. Okay, do they? They don't prove that, do they? No. Were also the Catholic natives of the islands of Ternate and Tidore of the Malakas. Okay, so now we're down in Indonesia, basically. Converted during the Portuguese occupation of the islands by Jesuit missionaries. A number of Merdikas were resettled by the Spanish in the communities of Ternate and Tanza to Cavite, Manila, in 1663. Now, do you see what they just did here? So some people from 2 islands south of the Philippines in the 1600s were displaced into the Philippines by the Jesuits. They converted from, well, likely Islam, of course, and yes, some try to make that connection that then means the Philippines was Muslim, yet it never was. And a group being forced to migrate doesn't make it so. Nor are those Indonesians the poster children for what Marcos was talking about when he mentioned Maharlikans, are they? No. Let's look at this Indo-Malay word, Merdika. Does it actually connect here? If it does, how did it then become Maharlika? Because they would need to prove that, right? Well, they don't. Don't worry, they'll take you back to India, into another language, and claim that is the origin. But problem, if it became Mardeka in Indo-Malay, before coming to the Philippines, how does it go back to being, well, Maradika, not Maharlika, by the way, but how does it go back to that? These linguists lack common sense sometimes, and they just don't even attempt to prove things out and truly connect. We are supposed to take their word for it, yet they ignore history almost entirely many times in their etymological stretches. And this is one of those instances we'll prove. Merdeka is a word in the Indonesian and Malay language meaning independent or free. Okay. It is derived from the Sanskrit Mahardika. Wait, is that Maharlika? No. Let's be clear. It is a different word. and they need to connect it in order to make the claim that they're making, and they do not. We'll show you. Meaning rich, prosperous, and powerful. Okay. In the Malay archipelago, this term had acquired the meaning of a freed slave. Kind of weird, because that doesn't make one rich, prosperous, and powerful, but okay, we'll give them that. But here's what logic tells us. If this word originated in the Sanskrit, Indian language, Maharlika, which, by the way, is still not Maharlika, is it? Then it was changed in Indonesia to Merdeka, which is fine. We'll give them that, though again, the original word is still not Maharlika. But sounds close, maybe, which is not good enough, and sloppy work, not scholarship. Let's call this what it is. But how does Merdeka then get to the Philippines and get changed back to Maharlika when it's recorded in the Philippines as Mardika, the variant, not the original? And then somehow an L replaces the D. Well, you'd have to show that. You'd have to prove that in order to make this erroneous connection, which goes on and on and on and on and doesn't actually connect. This discipline of etymologies is full of massive stretches. They don't actually make sense. And this is one of those. And there are Philippine historians that agree this is not the same word as Maharlika. We'll show you. By the way, especially meaning. By the way, are we saying Duterte is wrong? No. We are saying academia from which he learned, and all of us, didn't do their research. See, we rely on them for that, and we shouldn't. We have to do our own for that reason. So that's what he did regarding this word and its definitions. And these people in academia typically only know a contrived history in a false paradigm. They do not know the full history of the Philippines. If they had, there would be no need for us to have to produce Solomon's Gold series. Yet there was a massive need for that. And we do restore this history indeed. The term Mardiker is a Dutch corruption of the Portuguese version of the original Sanskrit words and was used to designate former Portuguese and Dutch slaves from India in the East Indies, known as Mardikers. Whence the Malay meaning of freedom is derived. Mardiker are the former Catholic slaves brought from India and the East Indies that were liberated by the Dutch if they abandoned Catholicism and embraced the Dutch Reformed Church. Again, is that word Maharlika? No, not in origin, nor even in its corruption. It doesn't fit, and you can see the contrived history here, because where is this going? Well, Catholics were enslaved in India, and they were brought to the East Indies, specifically Indonesia, Malaysia, not Philippines. Then because that's what they're going to follow here, those Catholics came into the Philippines, and it's Catholics who are the Maharlikans. No, that is false. Yet this is what this alludes to. Doesn't come right out and say it. We admit that. But that's what we see. That is where this is heading. So first you have the Muslims trying to claim Maharlika as their word when it's not. Now you have Catholics trying to do the same when it's not. Period. The term, again, Mardiker, or however you pronounce it, or Mardika, not Maharlika. But they keep going on anyway as if they connected this, and they didn't, did they? Was significant during the anti-colonialist and pro-independence movements of the colonies of Indonesia, Malaya, and Singapore in the history of Indonesia, history of Malaysia, and in the history of Singapore. Missing Philippines, not there. See that? It became a battle cry for those demanding independence from the colonial administrations of the Netherlands and United Kingdom. In the southern Philippine island of Mindanao, the Moro people, wait a minute, who are the Moros? Moros are Muslims, and that originated from Indonesia, so no surprise they used an Indonesian term there, but it still was not Maharlika, it was Merdeka, belonging to major ethno-linguistic groups of Maranao, Maguindanao, and Aranan, and they all use Merdeka, not Maharlika, in the same meaning as freedom or liberation. Yes, that's because Merdeka is a Malay word, but Maharlika is not, and they are not connected. They do not prove that here at all. Are we the only ones noticing they seem to be ignoring the word Maharlika in all of this? That's because it is a different word of different origins. You'll see. The liberation of those using Merdeka are Muslims, and no way that is what Marcos was referring to in any sense. This is very mixed up, and that's on purpose, as this is used in some circles to force a Muslim history on the Philippines, which just is not there as a whole. It was always and has always been and will always be a very small minority group in the Philippines. Never was this a Muslim country. But now they connect it, or do they? The Tagalog term Maharlika has the same Sanskrit origins. Really? Because you just went around all of these circles and you never proved that, and now you draw that conclusion? How? Well, not logically. So the same Sanskrit origins as the Malay Merdeka, which is used in the Philippines. So, and means free man, libertos, or freedman in classical Philippine society. In the ancient history of the Philippines, the related term Maharlika in the Tagalog language, a close cousin of Malay, refers to the feudal free warrior class. Now, do they prove the Philippines ever even had a feudal free warrior class? No. So, they say so, and that's it. Have they proven the word Maharlika originates with the Indian Sanskrit word Mahardika, or the Indonesian name Merdeka, which we agree comes from Mahardika? Fine, but neither's Maharlika. Was the same exact word used in Mindanao by Moros, Muslims from Indonesia, or connected to Muslims from Indonesia. That's how they became Muslim. Not Mahardika, however. The Moros did not use that term. They used the Indonesian term Merdeka, which does not then become Maharlika. It's nonsense. Yet they go backwards and pull out an etymology from Sanskrit. But does it make sense? Well, let's see. Let's vet this further. Let's follow the logic here and see if you think this is clear. We begin with Mahardika from the Sanskrit language of India. Is that Maharlika? No. Then they take it into Indonesia, and the word shortens to Merdeka, very sensible, in the Indo-Malay language. And we agree. That's a good etymology thus far, but they never prove that Mahardika is Maharlika in origin. But no matter, because then the word Merdeka, exactly as it is recorded in Indonesia and Malaysia, makes its way into use in the Philippines by the Moors or Muslims. Again, that is a logical etymology that far. But here's the problem in logic, and we see this from academia in this discipline all the time. They fail to explain how Merdeka is used in the Philippines already, yet somehow it becomes Maharlika, back to the supposed original word in Sanskrit in India. The notion is nonsense. We are supposed to believe because they connect Mahardika, which is shortened then to Mardika, which they do, that they can then wave their hand and jump to Mardika, first going backwards in etymology, which is nonsense when Merdeka is recorded as being the form used in the Philippines. Okay, so that word's already in the Philippines. Not Mahardika, but Merdeka. The next phase of the etymology. And it doesn't go backwards. But somehow we are supposed to believe they go back to Mahardika, and then somehow changes are made to that word to become Maharlika. And they connected this how? Not at all. No source we have ever reviewed has ever connected this, because they cannot. So what does this prove? The word Maharlika has other origins. How can that be? Everything that comes into the Philippines has to come through Indonesia and Malaysia, from India, through their supposed Muslim heritage, typically. We say, nonsense. The Philippines has a minor fraction of Muslims still today, and that does not happen in Muslim countries. If it was Muslim, especially right next to the largest Muslim population on earth, and it came from there, which we prove overwhelmingly it does not, then a great majority of the country would be Muslim, not 5%. This is not an etymology, nor is it connected with history, which is the real way to support an etymology and prove an etymology, though scholars rarely do, especially when it comes to the Philippines for some reason. Why? They do not know the history, for one. They know what is taught, and well, we'll give them that. But they do not know Philippines is Ophir, the Garden of Eden, and the land of creation. And those are massive oversights. They really need to watch Solomon's Gold series. Again, this is because they do not know the history of the Philippines, and they do not know what language to study to figure this out, to find the origin of this etymology. Sanskrit is not correct. Tagalog also shares origins with another language that many historians ignore, yet even the Jesuits recognized the similarities of this language with Tagalog when they came. And we cover that in the series in detail. Again, the Philippines was tied to Israel as a trading partner since 1000 BC. Yes, we prove that. And the Queen of Sheba made her trip from the Philippines to Israel to offer gifts and to question Solomon. Could Maharlika be Hebrew? Oh, well, unthinkable, right? Well, let's see for yourself. Why, yes, it does. The Hebrew word mahar, same exact spelling, is a direct Hebrew word meaning, check this out, to acquire by paying a purchase price, endow, surely, to bargain, for a wife. Example, to wed. So, a bride purchased for a price. Who might that sound like? We'll get there. And laka. Again, direct Hebrew word, same sound and practically the same spelling. Laka means to, for, or of you, indicating possession. Whose possession? Whose bride? Well, when you review Solomon's Gold series as well as our Lost Tribes series, the answer becomes obvious. His bride, the bride of Messiah, and she was purchased or redeemed with his blood. Now, look at this word. This is an etymology with an exact match, and abundant history to confirm that no, we cannot possibly prove out in this video. We do it over 20 videos in Solomon's Gold series, and then another 20 in the Lost Tribes series or more. Maharlika to Mardika, which was actually used in the Philippines, not Maharlika, but the shortened version, which discounts the original word completely in use in the Philippines. No, wasn't there. Mardika is not Maharlika, nor is it its origin. It sounds a little similar. It has some of the same letters, we admit. But this direct Hebrew makes far more sense, and it is an exact match. Of course, academics are not searching for these and wouldn't even see this coming for the most part because they are mostly unaware of the connection to Solomon and Israel, which ancient Ophir, Philippines had, nor the Hebrew origins, as Ophir was grandson of Hebrew or Eber, which is the same word as the word Hebrew. Hebrew is basically Eber, plural, with an S on the end, showing his possession. Those who are Hebrews are Ebers in the Hebrew language. It is the same word, only plural. Many assume Hebrews only came from Abraham, but they forgot Abraham was called a Hebrew by others who already knew he was also from Eber, and that is exactly what they were indicating, which made him different from the other people in that land, because Eber's lineage did not live there for the most part. Abraham was the first. So which makes more logical, even academic sense? That Mahardika became Merdika in Indonesia, which was then used as the exact same word, Merdika, in the Philippines, which makes sense to that point for the word Merdika, which is all they prove. They do not connect that to Maharlika, and the way that they attempt to is nonsense. It doesn't even make sense. Yet somehow a giant leap, or let's call it what it really is, a guess, and not an educated one, logically. Or how about a direct etymology of almost exact spelling and the same sound, direct from Hebrew to Tagalog? We smell another Jesuit false narrative here. Do you? Now, before everyone goes thinking we are attacking historians in the Philippines, let's be clear, we are not. We are proving this out, and we prove they do not. That's just fact. That's it. Is this because they are not smart? No, we would never say that. These are brilliant men and women, well educated in their discipline, but because they are educated into a false Jesuit paradigm, as we all are, meant to obscure this knowledge, all they get to review is that false paradigm. And no one can pull the truth out of that. You have to leave that paradigm, at least in thinking, in order to get to the truth. It is not their fault, though we pray that their eyes are opened soon, as many are and many will, especially in the Philippines. And the rest of us go to school to be educated into this same paradigm, just as Duterte expresses here. And we learn the same Jesuit narratives, even ignoring the first historian who came with Magellan, Pigafetta, which is just simply in any other profession simply called fraud, period. Again, if anyone is unaware of the connection to Israel and the Hebrew language of the ancient Philippines, you cannot expect them to make these kind of connections. They're not even looking for it, and this would catch them off guard, and maybe this video has caught you off guard, and that's okay. Test it, research it for yourself, prove it out, and see which is truth for yourself. Because the Bible says in 2 Thessalonians 5:21 that we are to prove all things and hold fast that which is good. However, it is time for the Philippines to restore its identity, whether in name change or not. Restore its history, which is the oldest, richest, and most significant in all of history. And it is time for the Philippines to rise, just as Messiah said it would in Matthew 12:42. In addition to the etymology, we are not the only ones to disagree with the definition of the word Maharlika either. Check this out. The Phil Star reports historian says Maharlika as nobility a misconception. We agree in a sense. Let's see what they mean though. They begin with the same details basically. You can pause the screen and read the full article if you wish, but let's skip forward. Mistranslated. Yeah, they are looking at the wrong language even. And these guys don't know that either. According to De La Salle University, still a Jesuit school, by the way, not his fault, but just clarifying. Assistant professorial lecturer and historian Zhao, however you say that, Chua. However, neither of these definitions of Maharlika are exactly correct. So he's saying they're wrong. We agree with that, but the understanding of Maharlika as nobility, he said, is a common misconception due to a mistranslation of historical texts. So he's saying even the historical texts are not even being read accurately. Okay, especially if they're being interpreted by, other Jesuits. We would agree with that. In Blair and Robertson, don't sound like Filipino names to us, likely Jesuits. If we studied them out, I'm sure that's what we would find. Maharlika was mistranslated to nobleman. When we read the English, we thought nobleman means royal-blooded. You can see them setting up a narrative with that whole thing, and there is a reason. That is a weighted find on their part, and he's saying it's wrong. They qualify the Jesuit credentials of the 55-volume series of Blair and Robertson. Just means they wrote a lot. Doesn't mean it's accurate. But William Henry Scott, another name that doesn't sound Filipino either, so likely a Jesuit in the Philippines, anthropologist and historian, said this is wrong because what happened was the Americans who translated the Spanish documents, which were eventually corrected, were found to be mistranslated. Now, so they were corrected then. So why is everything and everyone not just looking at the corrected versions then? The narrative doesn't quite make sense. Because this is another thesis, antithesis. Narrative meant to confuse you to the point that you throw your hands up in determining the truth, which you never have to do. You don't have to. You can cut right through the nonsense and get to the facts when you know the full history of the Philippines and throw out this foundation built on sinking sand, which the Jesuits built. When you say a noble person, you say dugong bughaw. You even have songs created during martial law that says, Ako ay Pilipino, may dugong Maharlika. He, Chua, explained that all Maharlika means is someone who was free. Really? That's it? Let's see. People were thinking we want that name. It's romanticized. named Qazi Royal. Hindi, no. It's just an ordinary person who is free. Is it? So you thought you were royal? No, you are just ordinary after all. What does this sound like to you? To us, a false Jesuit narrative with a thesis and antithesis, and the truth is somewhere else, not allowed into the paradigm, which is meant to obscure history. Why would we say this? You'll see the origin of this narrative. It is the Jesuits, and they are arguing with themselves. This is not the only article that goes there, though. The Manila Bulletin leads with the headline, NCCA clarifies that we have been wrong about the meaning of Maharlika. Wrong indeed, but they are still far off the mark. Growing up, most of us were taught by whom? Jesuit educators at the top, not the local teacher or professor, mind you, that Maharlika meant noble. One can recall that Maharlika is taught in some textbooks, also written by Jesuits suppressing history. Remember that, let's be clear. Meant a group of people who belong to an upper stratum of society, what would eventually be known in modern times as the elite. Now we agree that is wrong. Apparently, if a historian from the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, NCCA, that's where that comes from, is to be believed, we were all fed wrong information. Well, by whom? Jesuit textbooks and the Jesuit education system. That's whom. Why do they never seem to connect these things and take it to the next degree, as a reporter should? That's a massive failure of journalists today. They don't actually research things through. They'll only go to a point and they'll stop because they don't want to know any further, or really because they're also educated into a paradigm that they are boxed into and they cannot think outside of it. And that is a shame, especially for one calling themselves a journalist. But why don't they do that? You know why. In an interview over radio, DZMM Rolando Baranaga of the NCCA said that although it was true that it did indeed pertain to a select group of people, the Maharlikas did not participate in politics like a Datu. He also explained that they are also different from a group of freed slaves called Timawa, the ones from Visayas. If you noticed earlier, we mentioned this. The other historian who wrote the Wikipedia article was attempting to connect the Timawa and the Maharlikans. He didn't actually do it, of course, and he just assumed such, or at least that's all we know because, as is typical, he didn't bother to prove it out for us because we're just supposed to take his word for it. And they need to stop doing that. We need to hold these scholars, educators, whatever you want to call them, we need to hold them to task. They have to prove things out even more than you and I do. Even more, because they're supposedly educated. They're supposed to know more. They're supposed to be able to make these connections and pull all the logic together. Not just make guesses and assertions, and then we're supposed to buy it because, well, they have 3 letters after their name. No, thank you. The word Timawa has since evolved and is now being used derogatively to pertain to a type of person who just relies on the grace given by other people. So the word's changed over the years, and that is not uncommon. The discussion on the word Maharlika instead, supposedly to pay homage to our Malay roots, which he proves how? Well, he doesn't, and he even says, in all fairness, he says supposedly, meaning he doesn't know the actual root of the word, including the Malay root, because he's saying supposedly. So he does not know the root. That is what he's saying there. He's not admitting it, but that is what the statement is saying. And no one else proves that either. Yes, some Malays came to the Philippines, and some were even Muslims, but that is much fresher in history than the abundant history all the way back to 1000 BC and before, when even Joktan's sons, Ophir, Sheba, Havilah, and others came to the Far East, according to Genesis 10. Yes, it's in Genesis, describing that they came to the land of the Garden of Eden in very specific Hebrew language, and we prove that out. It is indisputable when you watch. Which the book of Jubilees then gives exact directions to the Garden of Eden in the Philippines. Imagine that. Confirmed by science, language, history, etc. Some Malays came to the Philippines, yes. But chicken migration patterns and the oldest human skeletons prove the Philippines is far older and the origin of the Malays, not the other way around. This is all a forced history to attempt to paint the Philippines as, number one, a Muslim land, principally. It's used that way many times. Which, if it were, 80 to 90% of the nation would be Muslim, not 5. The notion is absolute nonsense. And again, very forced and just plain false. So where did this narrative originate? Well, Maharlika has been all but erased in history, largely, as what we're about to show you is the very first account of the word in writing. The only contemporary account of the Maharlika class was by the Franciscan friar Juan de Plasencia in the 16th century. He distinguishes them from the hereditary nobility class of the Tagalogs, the Maganu class, which included the Datu. So in his account, he's saying they were not nobles, they were not royals. And that's the history that we have. The historian William Henry Scott believes that the class originated from high-status warriors, which he doesn't prove either, who married into Maganu blood, he doesn't prove either, or were perhaps remnants of the nobility class of a conquered line. He doesn't prove either. They were not nobility, they were lost tribes of Israel. They come from, even the ones back to the land of Ophir before the lost tribes arrived. They come from Eber, same that Abraham does. They are Hebrews. So similar high-status warriors in other Philippine societies, like that of the Bagabo and the Bukidnon, did not inherit their positions, but were acquired through martial prowess. So, the Jesuits are the origin of the narrative, and they can't even agree with themselves somehow. The reason this whole conversation ignores the true history of the Philippines completely and remains ignorant of who came to the Philippines and when, and who came from the Philippines as well. Once they learn, if they will ever listen, that the Philippines is ancient Ophir and one of the 3 migration regions of the lost tribes of Israel, then they can begin to understand the origin of such a Hebrew word as Maharlika, which we have no issue coming right out and saying is Hebrew, because that is an etymology that makes sense and fits history, and nothing we've read from any of this other stuff makes any connection whatsoever. This is a direct variant. And it hardly varies because it's the exact word. Again, you will not learn this even in college levels because the education system is controlled by the Jesuits and has been for centuries. And yes, they have had an obvious agenda to suppress history in the Philippines. This is why we find agreement for our position in writings prior to the 20th century, especially even from some Jesuits. Ooh. And you can watch it being erased and obscured over time, especially from the time of the writings of Pigafetta, who traveled with Magellan, all the way through. You see the narrative changing, being altered from basically a very wealthy people who is literate, who has resources, who has culture, all of these things, and then all of a sudden you end up with a bunch of natives in diapers when you read Jesuit writings 200 years later. Well, what happened? Well, certainly they got rid of a lot of the wealthy people, no doubt, but again, a lot of the accounts that we read actually equate a very flat level form of government in which you could call them nobles, although they were not nobles, but the barangay captains basically were innumerable. No one could even number them. There were so many, which means the wealth was spread throughout the country. And there are many such quotes that we cover in part 6 on this as well. The British never disproved this history either, and that's one of the things you'll hear from time to time. The first video we released, we started hearing, oh, the British already disproved that. Did they? No, they didn't. Here's what they did. They committed fraud to attempt to claim the history of the Philippines because they didn't discover the Philippines, of course. And they did so in Malaysia in 1801 by renaming one mountain as Mount Ophir. Oh, well, that just proves it. That's it, right? Except the local Malays, who are recorded in history as giving directions to Barbosa the explorer, which led him to the Philippines when he was searching for Ophir. So they knew they were not Ophir and where it was. Well, they rejected this name then, and they still refused to use the contrived British fraud as they know better, because they know it's not their history. And they're not trying to make that claim. Only the British are, falsely so. Now, without getting into the conversation of Marcos's guerrilla unit in the military called the Maharlikans of some sort, and whether it really existed or not, which has nothing to do with this word, because this word is restored, perhaps by Marcos's claims, yes, but that is not its origin. And we don't really cover politics here. We don't care whether that's true or not true. We also don't buy the CIA and the U.S. military's narratives. We test them too. We are to test everything, prove all things. So we don't really cover politics here. But let's see what the Duterte administration says about Marcos's use of the word Maharlika again. The Manila Times and pretty much all the others quote this clarification from the Duterte administration as saying Marcos is correct. During his time, he was right. He wanted to change the name to Maharlika, the Republic of Maharlika, because Maharlika is a Malay word. Now, no, it's not, but that is what we are all taught. Again, the Duterte administration is just repeating what academia has taught them. And we've all been taught the same. But this next part is different. And it means more of a concept of serenity and peace. Interesting. That's not noble man or elite, is it? No, it's not. So let's break this down. The Jesuits are the origin of this puppet show of thesis and antithesis as a debate. And they do this everywhere. They say Maharlika means royal or noble, versus the other Jesuit position, they're both the same, that now Maharlikans are just ordinary free men. Anybody, and nobody of importance. So what's the big deal? Well, why would Marcos, like him or hate him, he was not a dumb man, but very smart. And that's indisputable. Why would he continue to push Maharlika as a name of very significant meaning and a former name of this land. And now you see it not only in the Senate, but now with President Duterte as well. Both of these narratives are false, and they create a paradigm where the media can keep you watching the puppet show, where Jesuit Puppet 1 takes one side and Jesuit Puppet 2 takes the other side. But they both have the same master. Meanwhile, you never get to see the full truth of abundant history right under our noses all this time. This just further suppresses history. The Duterte administration clarified that Maharlika meant peace and serenity, and that fits as well. Yes, it even fits the lost tribes of Israel, as well as the land of Ophir, which was not a warring culture, as some historians seem to wish to express. However, neither royal, elite, nor nobles, nor ordinary men fit whatsoever. The real, complete history of the Philippines as the land of Ophir and a lost tribe's location demonstrates a direct Hebrew etymology. Maharlika is bride of Messiah, as some may term the bride of Christ, and the land of the lost tribes of Israel. Yes, we do prove all of that. That is no small thing. And if you haven't reviewed Solomon's Gold series or our Lost Tribes series on this channel, you are probably wondering, rightfully so, how can they prove that? Well, watch. And you will find we do not speculate, as these academics do, but we prove. And in 2 years, no one has disproven our findings or conclusions. But we ask you to watch and then go out and prove all things for yourself. Don't just take our word for it. It is time. The history of the Philippines is restored, and it is time she fulfills her role in biblical prophecy. Yes, that's there. Because yes, the Philippines is in the Bible, and her role in the end times is huge. It is time for the Philippines to rise, as Messiah said she would, and restore her identity and her place in history. And if changing the name is a step in that direction, well, we are behind it 100%. The name Maharlika is a very appropriate name for the Philippines, and we would love to see it. Thank you for watching our Solomon's Gold series. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the bell. Share this video with others and check out our website at thegodculture.com. If you wish to give to assist with our Rise Philippines conferences, a link is about to appear on the screen as well. And you can go there and learn more details and support if you are led to do so. Again, this channel is free and requires no offerings to continue bringing you these videos. Thank you for your support, no matter what level, or even as a viewer only. We appreciate you all the same. Always remember to prove all things for yourself. Yahuwah bless.